All right, let's go back now to Sherwin Bryce-Pease joining us live from New York. Sherwin, let's continue then with our discussion. I mean, President Trump said that the organizations, these 66 organizations, operate contrary to U.S. interests. He said that, some of them make decisions that undermine American sovereignty or economic priorities. I mean, these are some things that could be thrown back to the U.S., in fact. Given that you've been covering issues within the UN and having just listened to Daniel Forty, what immediate impact do you think that this will have inside the UN system, financially, but also politically too?
Unati, it's a great question. I think what the United Nations writ large and agencies in particular have been grappling with are concerns about, its future existence. There is an existential threat here, particularly when you have the biggest funder of the United Nations, whether you're talking about the regular budget, whether you're talking about humanitarian programs around the world. The United States is the most powerful economy in the world and has shown up in so many ways over the decades, particularly since the United Nations inception in the late 1940s. And so this withdrawal has financial implications, the extent to which in terms of these 66 organizations we are still coming to terms with. It's going to be interesting to see the language that the United Nations puts out in reaction to this decision, because they are, for all intents and purposes, Unati, walking a very tight rope here in terms of what they can say, in terms of pushback. Maybe regret is probably language you'll hear, but this is a gut punch to how this organization operates. It devalues the consensus-seeking nature of the United Nations, because when one country the size of the United States and the impact that it has historically had on the operations of this organization, that's going to hurt moving forward. And so there might be some short-term domestic victories in terms of the Trump administration in moving forward here politically. This looks good for Republicans given their base and their antithetical or critical views of the United Nations, particularly as it relates to issues like the Palestinian question. And so moving forward here, who is going to fill that vacuum? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be other larger developing countries around the world? We often talk about this multipolarity that is now infused how global geopolitics operates. But, can you put your money where your mouth is in terms of filling the vacuum now that will be left by the United States? There might be some eagerness from Beijing in terms of that. But where we go from here will really be framed by how the United Nations responds, and we are expecting some sort of reaction from them imminently. We've been waiting.
And Sherwin, as we wrap up our conversation, interestingly, earlier on, we had one of our research teams just speak to us about how this all flows directly from the Trump administration's national security strategy that was formed November 2025. And in fact, everything that we've seen to date, including, of course, the aid cuts earlier this year, or last year rather, also the fact that this particular document explicitly rejects multilateralism, something that has, come out very prominently in the G20. As you look at the vacuum that the U.S. is going to be filling or leaving, rather, with how it has been acting in recent weeks, months, it does leave the question, what are we likely to see from the BRICS nations? What are we likely to see from allies, in terms of the global south? There's so many questions that one is asking themselves, but perhaps we should internally look at this as, going forward, we shouldn't be surprised.
Look, I think it takes, not just for multilateral institutions, you mentioned BRICS, you mentioned the G20, but it also takes some introspection from national positions. How can countries do for themselves, perhaps, what the United States has sought to do in terms of aid that has been regressing in recent times, devaluing the consensus-driven nature of the organization by essentially just withdrawing and walking away and criticizing it. I mean, if you look at some of the language from Marco Rubio, he talks about how the list list of organizations they're withdrawing from demonstrate what started as a pragmatic framework of international organizations for peace and cooperation has now morphed into sprawling architecture of global governance, often dominated by progressive ideology and detached from national interests. They then mention DEI. That was a terminology used in terms of withdrawing from the G20 forum when South Africa presided over the forum. Issues around gender equity, climate orthodoxy. Many international organizations now serve a globalist project rooted in the discredited fancy of, quote, the end of history. But if recent examples are our guide, the financial crises, when the Obama administration, sort of 2008, 2009, if you look at the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, if you look at the responses to climate change and the sustainable development agenda, it takes a consensus-driven approach to achieve the goals that the United States was party to in 2015 when they adopted the SDGs. So, you're sort of waiting maybe for the next administration to come in and change things. Maybe it's going to be Democrat, maybe they rejoin, as Nick was talking about. But the consistency that one expects from countries in terms of international engagement is being eroded here. The United States is no longer a reliable partner in the multilateral sense, certainly. And so it does devalue how countries are going to view the United States moving forward as a reliable partner, and that in the longer term is probably going to diminish the US's position on the world stage.
Sherwin, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for that. Of course, Sherwin Bryce-Pease coming to us live there from New York, giving us that different vantage point in as far as this particular decision by the United States is concerned. President Donald Trump having signed a memorandum ordering the withdrawal of the U.S. from 66 international organizations, nearly half of which are UN bodies.